Now that I've gone into and over what familiars are, it's time to get into a chapter that is very near and dear to my heart, and that is education. I think the education system in this country is terrible. Not necessarily that it's terrible, but there's so much more that it can be. You know what I mean? It's not just this horrible system that, I mean, it's evolved over time and it's a lot better than it was, but hopefully due to this video now it'll get a little bit better. One of the ways that I think, obviously, like I was going over before with the prison system, like I was saying about how a lot of times an equal amount of money is spent on prisons as it is education, if we're able to eliminate all that type of crimes and all that other stuff that hopefully the first couple of chapters took care of, then you'd have all that extra money to pump into your education system. Some of you might be wondering how it is that I plan on increasing or making the education system better. I guess the flagship of my education system would be an interactive education like pod, basically. For the most part, this programming would stay with you for your entire life because the base program would or could be within your familiar. So not only do you start out at birth, but when you transfer to a different school, you get another teacher, you know, blah, blah, blah. It puts stress on you and it kind of hinders your learning a little bit with all these different teachers and all this different that and all these different, you know, teaching styles and all of this. So for one, being consistent would definitely help you out throughout your life. One of the ways that this system would do that is it would be completely self-customizing. And what I mean by that is everyone's different and everyone has a different way of learning that would make it to where they can learn better, faster. How they say some people are like visual, some people are, they have to just read it, they have to hear somebody say it to them, they have to write it down, and everybody's a different combination of these different things. I really think that this kind of system can, obviously we need to do a lot of research on how to develop something like this, but what it would end up doing is it would customize itself over the years to every single person individually, their learning style. So not only is it a consistent thing throughout your entire life, so there's one bonus, but two, it customizes itself to you. So however your learning style is, what makes you learn the fastest and the best and keep the most information retained, that's what kind of processes it would use for you. Having that, just those two systems, just those two, I think would make our education system go from K through 12, a type of system like that, to where you basically get an equivalent bachelor's degree of education at that point when you graduate from high school. That's sort of an improvement. People might think that's not really possible, but when you have a program like this, there would be a couple different features to this program. When, say for instance, you're having a test, and a lot of people when you're taking a test, sometimes you guess on something. Sometimes you know it's one of these couple, but you kind of guess the wrong one. And basically for every answer you get wrong, or even answers you get right, it'll ask you if you knew it, how did you know it, did you guess? It can use that feedback to collect all those answers and then reteach it to you and kind of re-emphasize, try a new teaching style maybe to help you with that. And I know some teachers go over things again, but it's really not customizable for each person. This would really help people get that one-on-one with every single student. So one of the major complaints with education is parents, they're like, my child needs more one-on-one attention. And there's just not enough teachers. You know, the classroom size is too big. You don't have enough time to grade all these papers and all this other stuff. But if a system like this were in place that were fully automated, then it would be like every single child would have their own personal instructor for their entire life. Like one-on-one attention all the time. It would be almost completely self-paced. Well, it would basically 100% be self-paced. I don't know why it wouldn't be. You'd work at your own speed. You'd go over topics and all the other things that you'd be able to go into things that interested you more, and it would actually help you develop your interests in such a way that once you're finished your career path, the choices for that would just be so simple. So simple. just because of all the data that would have accumulated on you at that point. It'd be like, okay, well, instead of going in and taking a test about what your personality is and what your career should be, it would be like, okay, well, this is what we think over these years that you would most enjoy, and you'd probably agree with it at that point because you're the one that was picking all those things, and it's not like just a test that you sit down and you're like, oh, well, I like this or I like this. It's stuff that you're actually doing. And a lot of times when people take personality tests or something like that, it doesn't really reflect who they really are, or how they're really feeling. It's just, sometimes people write things that they think that they should write or stuff like that. So that would help you out in that sense. Oh, and that's the other thing. Even when you're not in school, the base programming would be in your familiar. So when you're walking around, when you're being bored, it would basically be like taking your personal instructor with you everywhere. You could have it read your textbook in audiobook format to you while you're running, while you're exercising or something like that. Or it could quiz you on certain things that you had a problem with earlier, after you go over a couple more things. It basically, you could have interaction with your familiar or the pod at any point in the day, 24 hours. So you wouldn't have these huge breaks in between when you were learning information. So you would make sure it gets stuck in there, for sure. And that's another thing. Another part of the system for these pods is that it would be like a spherical pod that you sit in. When the seat's adjustable, you can go up and down. You can, the brightnesses, the colors, they're all adaptable to whatever colors that you're most sensitive to learning to. If you don't like bright colors and you don't learn very well with that, then it would all be customizable and it'll all be interactive. So there would be more text for people that learn better with more text, more pictures, more video for people that like more pictures and video, or any different level of combinations with that. Basically any idea that you can possibly combine into helping you learn faster and better would be in these things. And then some people might think, oh, well, what about teachers? Like what would happen to them? You would definitely still need and want teachers. For one, human interaction. I mean, you still need to control the classroom when they're not in the pods. You're going to want to coordinate group work, group assignments. And one thing that some people don't know is that teaching somebody something is in a lot of ways the best way to learn something. So coordinated a group activity where someone teaches another thing, I mean, sitting in your pod, it's kind of difficult to do that. And, with interactions, it might be hard to read between people. And so you'd still need a teacher there to coordinate things or to help facilitate questions and answers. And that's another thing. If you had a question and it wasn't an answer that popped up in the FAQ and it just spit you out an answer automatically, then for one, you can ask your teacher, or you can post it on like an education forum, and professors and stuff in the field would actually have access to those questions. You can get like the top responses back to you, so you'd be able to pick and choose the best response that would fit your learning style. And not only that, but having that bridge between the professional world and the education world, I think is very, very important, because you never know when some kid's going to be like, oh, why don't they do it this way? And then some fucking engineer genius is like, I never thought of that. Projects that students work on, or science fairs that they have, or anything like that, should be able to go back up and be able to be looked at and looked over, and answers that certain people give, because everyone's had a really good teacher. Someone's had that one teacher that said that one thing that helped them get through that subject. And if everybody had access to those really good teachers, those really good professors, those really good instructors, you'd have this cornucopia of great ways to explain things that would be available to everybody. I mean, everybody. That would definitely help out the education system. And I guess another part of that would be a year-round instruction. People kind of think that's shitty because they like their summer breaks, but I've been in public education and I've had those 3-month breaks, and honestly, when you get back from those, you basically brain dumped everything that you've learned that entire time. It's unfortunate, but it's true. I'm not saying that it needs to be like 100% year-round, like you don't get any breaks ever. Obviously, it'd be like in blocks, like they have designed already, where it's like you'd have 3 semesters or something like that in blocks, and you'd have like a 2 week break in between or a week break in between or something. You'd try to line it up with over Christmas as one of your breaks, and just to try to keep people happy and stuff like that. But you'd also get more school time in. You'd get kids off the street during the summers and being terrible, like I said before with graffiti. Yeah, it would just be a better system all around to have in there. And another part of this, I guess the third, fourth part of it, would be starting education earlier. I guess I can go into this now. These little pods could be adaptable to babies. I know this might sound kind of weird initially, but you know those little things that babies sit in, and their legs are free and they can like jiggle around, and like later on, I mean, they can use and move around. It'd kind of be like that, but with like a screen and stuff like that. So what that would do is it would start your education off basically right out of the womb. I mean, not right out of the womb, because I mean, small babies, you just can't put them in there. But once you hit like 6 months to a year, I mean, you can put babies in these things and it can teach them so much. It can have adaptive programming to mirror the instructors on the parents. So you don't necessarily completely separate your children from the parents. It would simulate their voice, their look and everything, so you'd still have that interaction with the parents, kind of. I mean, they'd probably still be there. I mean, you're not going to leave your kid at home, but they could be there working with you and be like, oh, hey, look, there's mommy or there's daddy, you want to learn something from me, or sign language. Babies should be able to be taught sign language very early on, because it's easier for them to communicate with their hands, and also you can use sign language to actually help them learn language in a more efficient way. So some people might think, oh, well, if I teach my kid sign language, he's not going to learn English very soon, and that's not the case. It will really help improve both. And the education system, the pod that they would go in, would actually help teach them both at the same time. So the instructor would always be signing and speaking to them at the same time, so they learn both in concurrence. This thing, obviously for babies, it would help them learn shapes, like I said, sign language, colors, whatever language they're supposed to learn first. It would just give them a jump start. And not only that, but it's an education tool that can be made fun for them. It can also take a lot of the pressure off of the parents, because having a baby is really stressful. Those things whine and cry a lot. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I love kids and babies and all that stuff. But like I said, having kids is really stressful. But if you were able to put babies in these machines and it could teach them and improve them, and it's not just like sitting them in front of the television for hours, letting them watch cartoons and stuff like that, where they're not really learning a whole lot. And I know some of those cartoons do a pretty good job at teaching on some level, but they're not gonna, it's not really interactive as much as these can obviously be. But if you start children out on this road to learning that soon with this sophisticated education system, take a lot of the stress off the parents, so that when the parent and child really do interact, hopefully it's nothing but just positive, loving interaction. No like crying, and not that there's not going to be crying, but there's not going to be a lot of anger on the parent's side or frustration on the parent's side, or there'd be a lot less, hopefully. It could also help with things like potty training and stuff like that. You might be able to, when they're in these things, obviously the baby version would be different than the young adult or adult version, but they'd have a system to help them be potty trained. And how they would do that is, the babies would be able to use the bathroom in the thing. Whatever they were doing at the time, it would give them like cues, like a audio or representation of one of their parents, like, oh, hey, you going potty, oh, blah, blah, blah. And then you can use those cues later on to help the child anticipate when it is that they're going to have their needs met by using the bathroom. And then, reward them for doing it in, whatever location, the toilet or whatever that you want that to happen, obviously. So kids would be potty trained faster. They'd learn their shapes, colors, probably alphabet to tell time, sign language, a lot of English if that's the language that they're learning, and possibly another language. And the parents don't really need to learn how to do those things to teach them. Obviously, they know how to do that, but that's in another chapter. But yeah, it would take so much stress off of that. And these kids, by the time they would go into kindergarten, like at 5 years old, they'd probably have an education similar to a 10-year-old. You never know how far it is they can go.